For decades, the world has kind of looked to Sweden as this perfect model society, right? A blueprint for how to get things done. But what happens when that blueprint starts to feel a little old? Today, we're going to dive into the pressure that's building on the famous Swedish model. We're calling it the Swedish strain.
Yeah, you've heard this a million times, I'm sure. It's this image of a social utopia, right? A place that just seems to have it all figured out. And you know what? For a very long time, there was a whole lot of truth to that.
So the whole global reputation of the Swedish model, it's really built on three huge pillars. First, this incredibly high level of social trust. People just believe in their institutions, and they believe in each other. Second, that world-famous welfare system. It's a safety net that's there for you from cradle to grave. And third, low inequality. The whole system is designed to create a more level playing field for everybody.
Which, of course, brings us to the big question for today. If the whole system is built on such a solid foundation, why are we even talking about this? What's causing these cracks to show up? That's exactly what we're going to unpack. But hang on. Before we get into the problems, we have to understand why the model worked so incredibly well in the first place. Think of it like a brilliantly designed engine, built to do one thing really, really well. And here's the absolute genius of it. It created this self-reinforcing loop. It all starts with high taxes. Now, those taxes fund amazing universal services. We're talking healthcare, education, the whole shebang. Because you have that powerful safety net, it seriously reduces the fear of personal failure. You know, if you lose your job or get sick, you're not totally on your own. And that shared sense of security, it builds immense social trust, which in turn makes people willing to pay those high taxes. See? It's just a perfect, virtuous cycle. And that really tells you everything you need to know about its core design. The main goal was never about, radical growth or crazy Silicon Valley-style disruption. It was all about social stability. And for generations, man, it worked like a charm. But what happens when the world that engine was built for starts to change dramatically? Well, that's when new pressures start to put a real strain on the machine. The first strain is really an economic one. The original model was designed to reward collective success. But when you have very, very high taxes over a long period of time, it can start to change the calculation for individuals. I mean, if a huge chunk of any extra money you make gets taxed away, it can subtly reduce your incentive to, say, take a risk on a new business or work those extra hours. It doesn't kill progress, but it can kind of pump the brakes on it. And this gets to the heart of a really difficult trade-off, doesn't it? That amazing safety net, it has a flip side. When the consequences of failure are minimized for everyone, that intense personal pressure to innovate and really push the boundaries can also get a little bit softer. Okay, the second major pressure is all about demographics. The system was originally built for a much smaller and, let's be honest, a much more culturally similar population. But today, Sweden is facing this double whammy: a rapidly aging native population that needs more and more services, and at the same time, large-scale immigration that brings branding really complex challenges for both culture and the economy. And all of that creates a serious economic squeeze. So on one side, you've got productivity growth slowing down. But on the other, the costs of that big welfare state and social integration are going up and up and up. You can practically see the gap getting wider, that gap between what the economy is producing and what the system promised it would deliver. At the end of the day, it comes down to a fundamental truth. Compassion might be the moral fuel of a welfare state, but a strong economy is the engine that makes it go. For the system to stay generous, it needs a growing base of people paying in to support it. Now, these economic issues, they don't just affect the government's budget. They actually have a much deeper, almost unseen impact on the very foundation of the whole Swedish model. To really get the danger here, we've got to talk about trust. A high-trust society is the secret sauce in the Swedish model. It's the invisible software that makes everything else run smoothly. It leads to low corruption, people following the rules, and this powerful sense of being in it together. It's the absolute bedrock of everything. So when that system starts to feel the strain, the consequences become very, very real. People start to notice it in their everyday lives. You're waiting longer to see a doctor. You're facing shortages in affordable housing. You see the schools getting more crowded. And you watch your local taxes creeping up just to keep things running as they are. The system isn't broken, but it's working much, much harder just to stay in the same place. And this leads us to the most critical question of all. When people see those universal services that they pay so much for becoming just a little less reliable, what happens to that bedrock of trust?
And right here is the model's hidden vulnerability. Trust is pretty easy to maintain when life is simple and predictable. But when a society gets hit with rapid, super complex challenges, like massive demographic shifts and a slowing economy, that trust becomes incredibly fragile. People start to feel like the system isn't delivering on its promise anymore. And that feeling, well, that can spread like wildfire.
So, where does all this leave the Swedish model? It's really not as simple as saying it's a success or a failure. It's more complicated than that.
Let's be super clear about this. This is not about the collapse of a nation. Not even close. Sweden is still, by almost any measure, one of the world's most successful societies. But what we're seeing is a system that was perfectly optimized for one set of conditions that is now trying to operate under a completely different set. It's bumping up against the natural limits of its original design. So the debate really isn't about whether the Swedish ideal of a stable, high-trust society is a good thing. I mean, of course it is. The real urgent question is whether that model, as it was designed, has the flexibility to adapt to the realities of a faster, more globalized, and way more complex world. And that's a question that has lessons for all of us.